Have you ever found yourself awake late at night, consumed by the uncertainty of tomorrow? The worries creep in about your job, your health, your family, your future, and suddenly the weight of it all feels too much to carry. It's like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into the foggy unknown, unsure of what the next step will bring. But what if I told you that all the things you fear about tomorrow, every unknown, every question, are already under God's control? I know it sounds almost too simple, too good to be true, especially when the world around us is filled with so much uncertainty. We worry, we try to predict, we try to control what's coming next. And yet, in the midst of it all, God is quietly working behind the scenes in ways we can't always see. You see, we often think that the future is something we have to figure out alone, that we have to control it, predict it, prepare for it. But the truth is, the future is already in God's hands. And once you understand that truth, you'll begin to see how anxiety does not have the power to define your tomorrow. God does. I want you to picture something with me for a moment. Imagine you're carrying this invisible backpack filled with all your worries and fears. Every step you take, it gets heavier. You think you have to carry it all by yourself, your family's needs, your health, your work, your relationships, your dreams, and it feels like it's just too much. Maybe it's the pressure of making the right choice. Maybe it's the fear of what's coming. Maybe it's just the overwhelming sense of being alone in your struggle. But what if I told you you don't have to carry that weight anymore? What if, in this very moment, you could put that burden down and trust that God already has a plan for tomorrow? It's a simple yet profound shift in how we see the future. Instead of looking at it with fear, we can look at it with faith, trust, confidence. I know it's not always easy to let go of that feeling of needing to control everything. In fact, many of us struggle with that, thinking that if we don't carry the weight, it won't get done. But I want to show you today that letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting that God is already working in ways we can't see. It's surrendering the fear of the unknown and embracing the peace that comes with knowing He has already gone ahead of you. You may be thinking, but how do I know? How can I trust God with something as big as my future? Well, let me tell you a story about a man named Abraham. Abraham was called by God to leave everything he knew, his home, his family, his country, and go to a place God had promised him. And though he didn't know where he was going or how God's promise would unfold, Abraham trusted. He didn't know the details. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing: God was already in the future he was stepping into. And just like Abraham, you can trust that the same God who led him is leading you too. Even when you don't have all the answers, even when you don't see the way ahead, God is already there. Now, I want you to pause and think about your life for a moment. Are there areas where you've been carrying unnecessary burdens, worrying about things you have no control over? What if you could release those worries and trust that God's got it? What if you could look at tomorrow with hope, not fear? If you're ready to start seeing your future through the lens of God's promises that are secure and unshakable, then stay with me. Today, we're going to uncover the truth that God is not only guiding your life, but already preparing your tomorrow. No matter what you're facing, no matter how uncertain it feels, you are not alone. And today, I want to show you how surrendering your future to God will bring you peace, freedom, and the courage to face whatever is ahead. I know this may sound difficult, but I promise you, the freedom that comes from trusting in God's plan is worth every step of the journey. You don't have to figure it all out. God already has, and that is where true peace begins. We all know that feeling, the one where your mind races with worries about the future. It's the middle of the night, and instead of sleeping, you're lying there, heart racing, thoughts spiraling, wondering what's next. Will I be okay? Will my family be okay? Will I have what I need when the time comes? You know that feeling, right? It's not just about big decisions either. Sometimes even the smallest things can trigger it. A meeting at work, a health scare, a relationship that feels off. You start to wonder, what if? What if things don't go the way I hope? What if I fail? what if I'm not ready for what's coming? But here's the truth. That fear, that anxiety about what's coming next is often based on something we forget in the middle of our worries. The future is not in our hands. That's right. The future is already in God's hands. And when we remember this, it changes everything. Anxiety thrives on the belief that we have to carry the weight of the future all on our own. But what if I told you that the weight you feel, the burden of the unknown, doesn't have to be yours to bear? What if you could let go of the idea that you have to figure everything out right now? What if God is already ahead of you, preparing what you need, even when you can't see it? I know it's not always easy to believe this when the pressure feels so real, but listen, God's got it. In fact, God has already secured your future. The same God who spoke the stars into existence and formed the mountains is already working in the unseen places of your tomorrow. It's not just about what you can see right now. It's about what God is already doing in the background, things you might not even notice until they show up as blessings and opportunities at just the right time. Think about it this way. Have you ever had a moment in life where everything seemed to go wrong and you just couldn't understand why? Maybe you lost a job, or a relationship fell apart, or things just didn't turn out like you had hoped. I've been there, and I know many of you have too. But then, months, maybe even years later, you look back and realize that those very struggles, those very moments of uncertainty, were the things that shaped you into who you are today. God was at work even when you couldn't see it, and that's what we call divine preparation. This is something that we can trust in as believers. God is never surprised by our circumstances. Even when life doesn't make sense, He is working out a plan for us, and we can rest in that truth. The Israelites didn't see the parting of the Red Sea until they stepped into it, but God had already prepared the way beneath the waters before they even reached it. The miracle began long before they even knew they needed it. So here's the lesson in all of this. Anxiety often comes from our desire to control what we can't. It's natural to worry, but God calls us to trust Him in the moments we can't control. The future doesn't belong to us to figure out alone, it belongs to God. And when we release it to Him, we find peace, not in knowing everything that's coming, but in knowing that He already does. And this doesn't mean you stop preparing or making decisions. It means you stop trying to figure out every possible outcome, stop worrying about what might go wrong, and trust that God is leading you to what's best for you, even if the path isn't clear right now. You don't have to have all the answers, God has them for you. As we walk into this journey together today, I want you to leave with one thing in mind. Your future is safe in God's hands. No matter what comes, no matter what you face, He's already there. And when you trust that truth, anxiety doesn't stand a chance. Anxiety, it's that feeling in the pit of your stomach that you can't shake, the thought that lingers in the back of your mind no matter how hard you try to push it away. You know it well, the endless questions about what's coming next. Will everything be okay? What if I fail? What if things don't go the way I hope? And just like that, the weight starts to build, doesn't it? You try to focus on the present, but your mind is already racing ahead, trying to predict every possible outcome. But here's the thing, anxiety doesn't come out of nowhere, it has roots, and understanding those roots is the first step in overcoming it. Anxiety often comes from the fear of the unknown, fear of what we can't control. When life feels uncertain, we reach for something solid, something we can hold on to. But we can't always grasp what lies ahead, and that uncertainty creates fear. Take a moment and think about the last time you were anxious. Maybe it was before an important meeting, or a life-changing decision, or even just about the day-to-day challenges. What was it that triggered the anxiety? Was it a situation where you felt out of control, where you couldn't see what was coming? We're all prone to this feeling. It's part of being human. But what happens when that anxiety takes hold and begins to dominate our thoughts? It starts to affect how we see the world around us. We begin to view everything through the lens of fear. We see danger in places where there's none. We assume failure before we've even tried. And worst of all, we forget the promises that God has already made to us. Think about this for a second. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, they were filled with fear. They saw no way forward, no escape. Behind them was Pharaoh's army, and in front of them, nothing but water. It must have felt impossible. In that moment, they let their fear cloud their vision. They couldn't see God's plan ahead, but that didn't mean God wasn't at work. The water was already parted beneath the surface. God had already prepared a way through the sea, long before they ever even reached it. But in the heat of the moment, they couldn't see it. And that's what anxiety does to us. It clouds our vision. It makes us focus on the obstacles and the unknowns instead of trusting that God is already ahead of us, preparing the way. It's easy to let the unknown become a source of fear. But here's the truth. Fear and faith cannot exist in the same space. Let's take this lesson a bit deeper. Anxiety often makes us feel like we're alone in our struggles. When we're anxious, we tend to isolate ourselves, don't we? We think we have to figure everything out on our own. But the truth is, when we carry anxiety alone, we make it heavier than it ever needs to be. God never intended for you to carry that burden by yourself. Think about what Jesus said in Matthew 6:34. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus wasn't just giving us a nice piece of advice. He was showing us how to live by faith, by living in the present, trusting that God will provide what we need for the next step. Worrying about tomorrow only robs us of today. Now, this doesn't mean we should ignore our responsibilities or stop planning for the future. What it means is we stop obsessing over the future. We stop letting it dominate our thoughts and take away our peace. Anxiety often comes from a place where we feel we have to control everything, but God's peace comes when we realize we never had to control it in the first place. So, what's the lesson here? The roots of anxiety lie in the unknown, in the things we cannot control. But the antidote to that anxiety is trusting God. When we trust that He is already ahead of us, preparing the way, anxiety loses its grip. It doesn't mean the future is always clear. It means we trust that no matter what happens, God is with us. As we move forward, let's remember this. Anxiety is not the absence of fear. It's the absence of trust. Trusting God doesn't mean there won't be moments of fear, but it means we don't let fear have the final say. Now that we've understood where anxiety comes from and how it affects us, let's dive into how we can start to release this anxiety and trust in God's plan for our future. We'll explore why surrendering the future to God isn't about giving up, but about stepping into the peace He's already offering. When we're caught up in the anxiety of the unknown, it's easy to forget one of the most profound truths in the Bible. God has a plan for your life. A plan that's not just for today, but for your future, for every step you take, even when you can't see the next step clearly. And here's the best part, God's plan is already in motion. You know, sometimes we hear that truth, but we don't always feel it in our hearts, do we? Life can be so unpredictable. We face challenges, setbacks, and moments where everything feels out of control. And when things aren't going as we hope, it's easy to wonder, is God still working? Does He still have a plan for me? But I want you to remember something that's been true for all of us since the very beginning. God has always been in control. From the moment He created the heavens and the earth, He had a plan, and that plan includes you. You may not see it, but everything in your life is a part of His purpose. God doesn't do random. His plan is intentional, and His timing is perfect. Look at the story of Joseph in the Bible. Here's a young man who had everything against him. His brothers sold him into slavery. He was falsely accused and thrown into prison, and for years, he seemed to be stuck in a situation that made no sense. It was easy to ask, where is God in this? But through every hardship, God was shaping Joseph into the leader he needed to be. And when the time came, Joseph was in the perfect position to save not only Egypt, but also his own family. Joseph didn't understand all the twists and turns in his journey, but God did. Every moment of hardship, every season of waiting was a part of a bigger picture, a plan that only God could see. And what's amazing is that, in the end, Joseph recognized God's hand in it all. He said to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Isn't that incredible? Joseph's story shows us that even in our darkest moments, God is still at work. His plan is not shaken by our circumstances. His purpose is not derailed by our mistakes or by the things that seem to go wrong. No matter how out of control life may feel, God's plan is secure. Now, I know it's hard sometimes to trust that when we're in the middle of a storm, we often want to know how things are going to work out, don't we? But here's the thing about faith. Faith is trusting in God's plan even when we don't see the whole picture. Think about the Israelites. They stood on the edge of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them. Everything in their natural minds screamed, "This is the end." But God didn't lead them there to abandon them. He led them to that moment because He had already prepared the way. The waters parted before they even took a step into them. God's plan was already in place long before they ever reached the sea. And that's how God works in our lives. We may not see the full plan, but we can trust that God is already ahead of us, preparing the way. Every step we take, He's leading us, guiding us, and sometimes, even when we don't understand, He's aligning things behind the scenes that we'll only see when we look back. The lesson here is simple but powerful. God's plan for your future is secure, even when you can't see it. So, when the anxiety of tomorrow starts to creep in, and you start questioning if God really has a purpose for you, remember Joseph. Remember the Israelites. And remember that God's plan for your life isn't something He's figuring out as He goes along. It's something He's had in mind since the very beginning. As we move forward, I want you to hold on to this. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to know what's coming next. All you have to do is trust that God does. And when you trust Him, you'll start to experience a peace that comes from knowing your future is in His hands. The fear of the unknown, it's something we all face, isn't it? That feeling when you're standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, and you just don't know what's ahead. It could be a job change, a move to a new city, a health diagnosis, or even a big decision in your personal life. The future can feel like a giant question mark, and every step you take into it feels like you're walking in the dark. But here's the truth. You don't have to be afraid of the unknown because you are not walking alone. And more importantly, the one who holds the future is already ahead of you, preparing the way. But how do we let go of the fear that comes from stepping into the unknown? Let me tell you a story about a man in the Bible who faced the unknown in a way that might seem impossible to us. His name was Peter. Peter was a fisherman, a man who was used to the steady rhythm of life on the water. He knew what to expect each day: cast the nets, pull them in, clean the fish, and start all over again. He had control, or at least he thought he did. One night, Peter and the other disciples were out on a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee. Suddenly, a storm blew in, and the waves began to crash over the boat. Fear set in. The disciples were terrified, convinced that the storm was going to take them down. Then, in the midst of the storm, they saw something that shook them to the core, a figure walking toward them on the water. At first, they thought it was a ghost. But the voice they heard wasn't just any voice. It was Jesus calling out, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Peter, ever the impulsive one, called out to Jesus, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus simply said, "Come." Peter stepped out of the boat. And for a few moments, everything seemed perfect. He was walking on water. But then, something happened. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the storm around him. And in that instant, he started to sink. Here's the lesson in that story. Fear of the unknown often comes when we take our eyes off God and focus on the storm. When Peter stepped out of the boat, he had the courage to do so because he was looking at Jesus. But the moment he let the storm distract him, fear took over. You see, the storm didn't stop. The winds were still howling, the waves were still crashing, but as long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he focused on the unknown, the things he couldn't control, he started to sink. And that's what happens to us, doesn't it? We step into a new situation, full of faith, full of hope, but then we start to think about all the things that could go wrong. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? What if things don't work out? And suddenly, our faith starts to sink in the waves of doubt and fear. But here's the good news. Jesus didn't let Peter sink. Even when Peter's faith faltered, Jesus reached out and caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And in that moment, Jesus didn't just rescue Peter from the water. He showed Peter that the way to overcome fear is to keep our eyes on Him, even when the storm rages around us. This is the lesson for us today. When we face the unknown, we have to focus on the one who holds the future. The storm will still be there. The fear will still try to creep in. But if we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we can step out in faith, trusting that He's already ahead of us, preparing the way. So when you're faced with the unknown, remember, you don't have to know everything about the future. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to trust that God, who has already walked through your tomorrow, is with you every step of the way. As we move forward today, I want to encourage you, let go of the fear of the unknown. Keep your eyes on Jesus and trust that He is leading you into a future that is far greater than anything you could imagine. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were waiting forever? Maybe you've prayed, waited, hoped, and tried to make things happen on your own, only to feel like nothing's moving. The clock is ticking, the pressure's building, and you start to wonder, God, when will this happen? Why is everything taking so long? Trusting God's timing is one of the hardest things we can do, isn't it? When we can't see the end of the road, when the future feels uncertain, it's easy to start doubting if God is even at work. We're so used to wanting things to happen now. Our culture, our world, everything moves fast. We're taught to go after what we want, to make things happen, to push until we get what we think we need. But here's the truth. God doesn't work on our timeline, and that can be frustrating. But it doesn't mean God's forgotten you or that He's not answering your prayers. In fact, sometimes the waiting is the answer. There's a story in the Bible that really shows us the power of trusting God's timing, and it's the story of Abraham. Now, Abraham was promised by God that he would be the father of many nations, but there was one small issue. Abraham didn't have any children. In fact, he and his wife Sarah were advanced in age, and Sarah had been barren her whole life. It seemed impossible. So, after waiting for years without seeing any sign of God's promise coming true, Abraham and Sarah decided to take matters into their own hands. Sarah told Abraham to have a child with her servant Hagar, and they thought maybe that was God's plan all along. But that decision led to a lot of pain, division, and heartache. What they didn't realize in that moment was that God's plan was never going to work out on their timetable. It wasn't until Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 that God finally gave them a son, Isaac. And when that miracle baby arrived, it was clear God's timing had been perfect all along, even when they couldn't see it. Here's the lesson in this. Trusting God's timing means knowing that His plans for you are always better than your own. Even when you don't see it, even when you don't understand it, God is working behind the scenes in ways that we can't imagine. There is a reason why things haven't happened yet. There is a purpose in the waiting. God's timing is always about more than just us getting what we want. It's about His perfect plan unfolding in the way that will bring the most glory to Him and the most blessing to us. In our culture, we get so caught up in the idea that everything should happen right now. But God doesn't work like that. His timing is perfect, and He knows exactly when we are ready for what He has for us. Think about it. If Abraham had gotten his promised child when he first prayed for it, he might not have been able to handle the weight of that blessing. It was in the waiting that Abraham's faith grew stronger, and in the waiting, he learned to fully trust God. And when Isaac came, it was a testimony to God's faithfulness and timing. Maybe today, You're facing a season of waiting. Maybe you're waiting for a job, for healing, for restoration in a relationship, or even for the clarity to know what comes next. It feels like it's taking too long, doesn't it? But I want to remind you today, God is never late. He's always on time, even when it doesn't feel like it. Here's what you need to remember. Trusting God's timing means trusting in His perfect knowledge of you. He knows exactly what you need when you need it. When you can't see the way forward, remember that God has already seen the way, and He's working things out in ways that will ultimately bring you peace, joy, and fulfillment. So, when you're in that waiting place, remember that God is never wasting time. He's preparing you, growing you, and shaping you for what's ahead. The waiting is not just a season of inaction, it's a season of preparation. And while you wait, you're not just sitting idle. You're being refined, strengthened, and made ready for the blessing that's coming. God's timing is never random, it's always intentional. And this is the beautiful thing about trusting God's timing. When we finally receive what we've been waiting for, it's so much better than we ever imagined. It's exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it. God's delay is never His denial. He's simply preparing you for something greater. There's something about being in control, isn't there? It feels safe. It feels comfortable. When we're in control, we feel like we can handle anything that comes our way. But the truth is, the more we try to control, the more we begin to feel the weight of it all. It's like carrying a backpack full of rocks. At first, you don't mind. You think, I've got this. But the longer you carry it, the heavier it gets, and before you know it, the burden becomes too much. And this is where surrender comes in. I know, it sounds like a strange word, doesn't it? Surrender. It's often associated with weakness or giving up. We think, if I surrender, I'm giving up my power. I'm letting go of control. What will happen if I do that? But here's the truth about surrender. Surrendering to God isn't about losing control, it's about gaining peace. Let me tell you a story about a time in my life when I had to learn this lesson the hard way. There was a time when everything seemed to be falling apart. I was working hard, trying to juggle everything, family, work, church, responsibilities, and I thought I could handle it all. But the more I tried to control everything, the more overwhelmed I became. I started to feel anxious, like I was drowning in the weight of it all. And that's when I realized something important. I was never meant to carry this burden on my own. I started praying, asking God to help me, and I remember feeling a gentle whisper in my spirit, "Let go, surrender it to me." And honestly, it scared me. I thought, what does that mean? What if things fall apart if I just let go? But as I prayed and reflected, I realized that surrendering wasn't about letting everything fall apart. It was about letting God step in and take control. There's a powerful verse in the Bible, 1 Peter 5-7, that says, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." In that moment, God was inviting me to do exactly that, cast my anxieties on Him. And when I finally let go, when I released my need to control everything, I began to experience a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Here's what I learned. Surrendering control to God doesn't mean we stop doing what we're called to do. It doesn't mean we stop working hard, making decisions, or taking action. What it means is that we stop carrying the burden of the outcome on our own. When we surrender to God, we acknowledge that He's in control, and we trust that He'll lead us where we need to go, even when we can't see the whole picture. Think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here's the Son of God, in His moment of greatest trial, facing the weight of the world on His shoulders. He knows what's coming. He knows He's about to be betrayed, arrested, and crucified. And what does He do? He surrenders. He says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus didn't want to go through the pain of the cross, but He knew that surrendering His will to the Father was the only way to bring about the salvation of the world. Jesus teaches us here that surrender isn't about weakness, it's about trusting God's will over our own. When we surrender, we let go of our need to control every detail, and we trust that God's plan is better than our own. Now, you might be thinking, That sounds great, but what about when things don't go the way I hope? What if surrendering doesn't fix my problems? And I get it, it's not always easy. Surrendering doesn't mean everything will be perfect, but it means that we are no longer trying to do it all on our own. When we surrender, we stop fighting God and start trusting that He's working things out for our good, even when we can't see how. Here's the lesson in this: when we release control to God, we find peace. It's like finally putting down that heavy backpack. The weight is lifted, and we can walk through life with a sense of peace, knowing that we don't have to carry it all. God is in control, and He's got us. So today, I want to encourage you to surrender. Surrender the fear. Surrender the worry. Surrender the need to know everything. Let God step in and take control. You don't have to have it all figured out. God is already at work, and He will guide you every step of the way. Faith, it's a word we hear often, especially in times of struggle. But what does it really mean to trust God in every season of life? When everything is going well, it's easy to say we have faith. But when things get tough, when the road gets hard and the answers seem distant, that's when faith is truly tested. Think about a season in your life when you were facing uncertainty. Maybe you were going through a tough time in your job, in your relationships, or with your health. And in those moments, did you find yourself wondering, why is this happening to me? Why is God allowing this? It's in these moments, when the ground beneath us feels shaky, that faith is more than just believing God exists. It's about trusting Him when we can't see the way ahead. There's a story in the Bible that really illustrates this kind of faith. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three young men were thrown into a fiery furnace because they refused to bow down to an idol. Now, I want you to really imagine what that must have felt like. They were facing certain death. The flames were hot, the odds were against them, and their fate was sealed. But listen to what they said to King Nebuchadnezzar before they were thrown into the furnace. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if He does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. 1, 2 are set. Do you hear that? They were standing firm in their faith, not because they knew how God would deliver them, but because they trusted that God was with them no matter what. They knew that even if God didn't rescue them in the way they expected, He was still good and He was still in control. That's the kind of faith that God is calling us to. Faith isn't just about believing when everything is going well. It's about trusting God even when the path ahead is unclear. It's about holding on to the belief that God's promises are true even when we don't understand how they will unfold. It's knowing that God is with us in every season, whether we're on the mountaintop or walking through the valley. I remember a time in my own life when I had to learn this lesson. I was facing a season of uncertainty, unsure of where I was headed. It was a time of transition, and everything seemed up in the air. I prayed, I asked God for direction, but the answers didn't come immediately. The more I tried to control the situation, the more anxious I became. And that's when God whispered to me, "Trust me. Even if you don't see the way ahead, I am leading you." In that moment, I had to make a choice. Would I trust God even when I couldn't see the end of the road? And that's where faith became real for me. Faith is not about having all the answers or knowing how everything will turn out. Faith is about trusting that God is good, that He knows what's best for us, and that His timing is perfect. Even when we don't have the answers, we can trust that He's leading us, that He's got a plan, and that He will never leave us. Here's the lesson for us today. Faith is trusting God in every season, not just when everything is going well, but when things are hard too. The seasons of waiting, of confusion, and even of pain, they are all part of God's plan for us. He's using those moments to shape us, to grow us, and to strengthen our trust in Him. As you go through your own seasons of life, whether you're in a season of blessing or in the middle of a struggle, remember this: God is with you and He is faithful. You don't have to know how it all works out. You just need to know that He is guiding you step by step. And that, my friends, is where peace begins. So, what does it look like to live out faith in every season? It means we choose to trust even when the road gets tough. It means we let go of our need to control everything and allow God to lead us in His perfect timing. It's about choosing peace over worry, trust over doubt, and confidence over fear. And when we do that, we will see that God is faithful in every season. We've all been there, those moments when anxiety grips our hearts and it feels like we're drowning in worry. The mind races, the chest tightens, and peace seems impossible to find. We try to push through it, but the weight of fear can be so overwhelming, can't it? Maybe it's the uncertainty of tomorrow, the what-ifs, or the fear of failure. And yet, in the midst of all that, God is inviting us into a deeper peace, a peace that isn't just a fleeting moment of calm, but a lasting peace that comes from trusting Him fully. Letting go of anxiety doesn't happen overnight, but the good news is that God has given us the tools to step into that peace. We don't have to stay stuck in fear. We don't have to keep carrying the burden of worry. But how do we begin to let go? How do we move from the weight of anxiety to the freedom of peace? Let me share with you some practical steps that have helped me and many others experience the peace of God in the midst of life's struggles. The first step is acknowledge the anxiety, but don't let it control you. I think a lot of us make the mistake of trying to avoid or suppress our anxiety, pretending it's not there. We tell ourselves, I shouldn't feel like this. I should have more faith. But the reality is, anxiety is a natural part of being human. It's okay to feel anxious. What matters is what we do with that anxiety. Instead of letting it take root and grow, we can acknowledge it and give it to God. We can say, God, I'm feeling anxious right now. I don't know what the future holds, but I trust you with it. In Philippians 4:6-7, Paul writes, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is the first step, turning our anxiety into prayer. It's not about pretending the anxiety isn't there. It's about handing it over to God and asking Him to replace our fear with His peace. The second step is focus on the present moment. One of the reasons anxiety can be so overwhelming is that we try to control everything what's happening now and what might happen tomorrow. But God tells us in Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. This doesn't mean we shouldn't plan or be responsible. It just means that we're not meant to carry the weight of the future. When we focus on today, on what God is doing right now, we release the burden of tomorrow. We trust that He will take care of what's to come. Think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was facing the cross, the weight of the world's sin on His shoulders. And what did He do? He prayed. He poured out His heart to God, and then He trusted His Father with what was to come. Even Jesus had to let go and trust God's plan. And if He can do that in the midst of His darkest hour, surely we can trust God in our moments of fear and uncertainty. The third step is practice gratitude. I know it might sound too simple. When anxiety is clouding your mind, how can you possibly feel thankful? But gratitude is a powerful weapon against anxiety. When we take the time to thank God for what He's already done, for the blessings we have today, it shifts our perspective. It takes our eyes off what we don't have and refocuses them on what God has already provided. This is a habit we can build, finding moments of gratitude even in the midst of our struggles. I remember a time in my life when I was facing a difficult season. I was overwhelmed with worry about the future, unsure of what God had in store. But I started making a list every day. I wrote down 5 things I was thankful for. Some days it was small things like the warmth of the sun or the smile of a friend. Other days it was bigger things like the love and support of my family or the ways God had provided. Gratitude shifts our focus from what's wrong to what's right. And when we shift our focus to God's faithfulness, anxiety begins to lose its power. Finally, the fourth step is choose peace through surrender. This is probably the hardest part. We love to be in control, don't we? We want to have all the answers, to know exactly how everything is going to work out. But here's the truth. We don't have to have it all figured out. Surrendering to God means we let go of the need to control the outcome and trust that He is in control. It's saying, God, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I trust you with it. I release my fear, my anxiety, and I choose to rest in your peace. In John 14:27, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." This peace isn't like the world's peace. The world's peace is temporary, based on circumstances. But God's peace is unshakable. When we surrender to God, we receive His peace, peace that passes all understanding, peace that guards our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So, how do we let go of anxiety? We acknowledge it, we focus on the present, we practice gratitude, and we surrender it all to God. And when we do that, we find the peace that only He can give, a peace that holds us steady when life feels uncertain, a peace that says, no matter what happens, I am safe in God's hands. Have you ever been in a place where the weight of everything just feels too much to bear? Maybe it's that overwhelming sense of confusion about the future, or the quiet anxiety that creeps in when you lie awake at night. In those moments, what do? Where do you turn? We all have our coping mechanisms. Some of us keep ourselves busy. Some of us try to push through. Some of us might even try to ignore it. But none of these bring lasting peace. The one thing that will bring clarity and peace is prayer. I know for many of us, prayer can sometimes feel like a last resort. It's easy to think, I'll pray about it after I've tried everything else. But prayer is not just a fallback. It's the first line of defense. Prayer is where we find God's peace, His guidance, and His presence in the midst of the storm. I want to share a story with you about a time when I learned the true power of prayer. It was during a season of uncertainty in my life, a time when everything seemed up in the air. I didn't know which direction to take, and I found myself constantly wrestling with worry. One morning, feeling completely overwhelmed, I sat down in the quiet of my living room and just began to pray. I didn't have any fancy words. I didn't have a specific plan for my prayer time. I just poured out my heart to God. And something happened that I didn't expect. Peace began to settle in. It wasn't that the situation had changed instantly, but in that moment, I felt like I was no longer carrying it alone. I realized that I didn't have to figure it all out by myself. God was right there with me, listening, understanding, and leading me forward. Jesus gives us a perfect example of how prayer can bring clarity and peace. In the Gospels, we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the hardest moment of His life. He knew what was coming: the betrayal, the arrest, the pain of the cross. And what does He do? He prays. In Matthew 26-39, He prays, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Jesus, in His humanity, felt the weight of what was coming, and in His darkest hour, He turned to prayer. But notice what happens. In that time of communion with God, He finds clarity. He doesn't get all the answers, but He finds peace in surrendering His will to the Father. This is the power of prayer. It's not just about asking God for what we want or need, but it's about opening our hearts to Him, aligning ourselves with His will, and receiving His peace. When we pray, we connect with the heart of God. We're not just talking to the air, we're engaging in true communion with the Creator of the universe. And in that communion, God begins to speak to us. Sometimes it's through a still, small voice, other times through His Word, or through a sense of peace that settles in our hearts. But no matter how He speaks, prayer brings clarity and peace that we can't find anywhere else. A lesson I learned early on in my walk with God is that prayer isn't about getting all the answers right away. It's about being in God's presence. In the quiet moments of prayer, our hearts are realigned. our worries don't seem as big. Our fears lose their grip. It's in prayer that we receive the strength to face the day, the wisdom to make decisions, and the peace to rest in God's promises. Here's the key. Prayer changes things, not just our circumstances, but our hearts. When we pray, we invite God into the situation, and He begins to work in ways we can't always see. It's like the moment Jesus calmed the storm with just a word. His presence brought peace to the chaos. And when we pray, we invite that same peace into our lives, even in the midst of uncertainty. So, how can we apply this in our daily lives? Start with honesty. God isn't looking for perfect words. He's looking for an open heart. If you're feeling anxious, confused, or afraid, tell Him. Lay it all out before Him. And then listen. It might not be an instant solution, but you will find that the more you pray, the more you start to sense God's peace settling in. And this peace, the peace that passes all understanding, will guard your heart and mind. As we continue on this journey together, remember that prayer is not just a ritual or a religious duty. It's a powerful tool for connecting with God, finding His peace, and gaining clarity. When you face anxiety, when you're uncertain about the future, pray. Surrender your fears, surrender your worries, and open your heart to God's presence. Because in the midst of prayer, you'll find the clarity you need and the peace that can only come from Him. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to leave you with something incredibly important. You don't have to fear the future. The unknowns, the uncertainties, the what-ifs, they don't have to control you. Because when we step into the future with confidence in God's plan, we can face anything with peace, strength, and assurance that He is already ahead of us. I know it's easy to look at the future and feel overwhelmed. Whether it's a big decision, a career change, a health crisis, or just the general uncertainty of life, it can feel like we're walking into a fog, not knowing what's around the corner. But here's the key. The future is not something to be afraid of because God is already in it. You see, God has a plan for your life, a plan to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope, Jeremiah 29:11. That promise isn't just something written in an old book. It's as real for you today as it was for the Israelites thousands of years ago. God is already working in your tomorrow, even if you can't see it yet. He's already preparing the way, setting things in motion, aligning people, opening doors, and closing others for your good. I want you to think about the story of David. Here's a young man who was anointed to be king, but he spent years in the wilderness, on the run from Saul, facing all sorts of challenges. David had no idea how God's plan would unfold. There were times when he must have wondered, God, why is this happening to me? Where is your promise? But through every trial, David was being prepared for what lay ahead. And when the time came, God placed him on the throne, just as He had promised. David's life shows us a powerful truth. God's timing is perfect. We may not always understand the journey, but God does. And the same is true for you. The path you're walking right now is not random. It's part of God's divine plan to shape you, strengthen you, and equip you for what's ahead. And when you trust that His plan is good, when you step forward in faith and not fear, you can walk confidently into your future, knowing that God is already in it. Let's be real for a moment. The future might not always look the way you imagined. You might not get all the answers right away, and you may still face struggles and difficulties along the way. But here's the lesson. Your confidence isn't in the path ahead, it's in the one who is leading you. There's a verse that has always brought me peace when I feel anxious about the future. In Isaiah 41:10, God says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's a promise. It's not just a nice sentiment, it's a truth you can hold on to. God is with you every step of the way. When you step into the future, you're not stepping into the unknown alone. You're stepping with the one who holds the future in His hands. As we close today, I want to encourage you to let go of the fear of what's ahead. Whatever you're facing, whatever uncertainty you're carrying, trust that God has already gone before you. He's already prepared the way. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to control the outcome. All you have to do is take the next step, trusting that He's with you. And when you do that, peace will follow. Confidence will follow. So, as you walk into your future, walk with your head held high. Walk with the knowledge that God has a plan for you. The future may seem uncertain, but you can face it with confidence because God is in it. You are not alone. And no matter what happens, His promises will never fail.